Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 best movies of 2016. 2016, wow, kind of sucked. Not a great year culturally, but we're here to talk about the year in movies. And that was better. No, actually, that sucked too. This year was awful. A lot of disappointing releases, a lot of weeks of nothing good out. After Civil War and after like the first 6 months or so, the first season, okay, I'd say before summer and ending with Civil War, I thought we had a pretty good year at that point, and I think everything after that never really worked out, particularly on a wide release level. I think there were interesting films released, smaller films, and there were good films after that, but I don't think as a year was a particularly great one, especially if you see movies every week like I do. There were long drought periods that just didn't stop with this year, and it was incredibly disappointing. And some years you have things like that, and most of the time I'm a lot more optimistic about the movie year. I'm like, oh hey, it wasn't so bad, we had these 10. I will say I was able to come up with 10 movies, but it was fairly easy for me. Usually it takes a little more time because there's so many good movies, and it was pretty, for me, clear what was going to be on here and what wasn't. You can always come up with 10 movies every year that could fill out a top 10 list, and I somehow have done that this year. The one thing when I make these lists every time is that keep your perception of the kind of movies you want to see open. Everybody wants to see the big blockbusters and the things you've been waiting months and months for, but try to seek out more interesting and different movies, because oftentimes that's the stuff I ended up liking a lot more than just seeing stuff at the multiplex. But same with at the art house, I was disappointed for months on end as well. So I think this year was a fairly middling, forgettable year cinematically in the broad sense, but I think there's some real amazing highlights from that we can take and go, hey, this year sucked, but at least we got these movies. So that's some consolation. But I actually, believe it or not, after making you feel bad, I actually have honorable mentions. These are the ones that got close, and I considered them, but they didn't make it on here. This is the top 15. These would have made it, but they didn't. So here are the honorable mentions: Pete's Dragon, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Hail Caesar, The Witch, and A Monster Calls. But what are the top 10? And these are, I guess, the films that I felt the best about, the films I liked the most, the films I would recommend over all the movies in 2016. These are the 10 that I found to be the very best, and the best that cinema had to offer. I saw lots of movies this year, but these are the 10 that I put above all else. So here are the top 10 of 2016. Number 10 is the film that returned one of my favorite directors with a very difficult, interesting, and controversial film, and that is Elle. He's talking about a kind of sexuality in a more complicated way than we're really used to from most movies. Now, it's not really certainly saying something about feminism. It's not saying something about rape in the general sense. It's kind of a character study of a very interesting character named Michelle, played very excellently by Isabelle Huppert, and how she dealt with this current situation, how she manipulated the situation, how she went through all of this. But it's not necessarily a statement about any of that, which could be more complicated and problematic for some people, made in an analytical way, but having that dark humor that Paul Verhoeven's known for. Elle is the kind of movie that it'll turn off a lot of people. It's kind of an odd kind of mishmash of a lot of things. Paul Verhoeven is Dutch. This film was written by an American and then translated into French. It feels European, but it also feels satirical in that kind of fuck you, how is Verhoeven getting away with this Hollywood way? And I love how satirical and dark this could take on certain things. And this does feel like kind of a challenging, interesting film from him. It doesn't feel like an easy home run that you expect from late directors. It feels like more of an interesting, thoughtful conversation that you'd never expect from an older man to really give you, and you wish they would do more of. Number 9, Arrival. Something that shows a sense of optimism and the idea of changing and getting better with technology, but also the thrill of understanding new and brighter concepts through technology and how much further that can possibly take us. They're really trying to understand and talk about knowledge and get somewhere with knowledge. Even if the world around these characters is trying to stop that, they know that their optimism and their quest for knowledge and be able to speak to these aliens is really their paramount concern, but also shows a matter of intelligence and understanding. It has a lot of hope within it, but it also has a real idea of intelligence being the main concern and being the better way to communicate and show how much further humanity can go with just simply intelligence. And what it's saying about language and even film language is incredibly interesting. How important it is to communicate, how important it is to talk to one another and understand one another, and how empathy is so important within that communication. And I really love that about this film. It reminds you of that hope in science fiction and that optimism and those great ideas of science fiction, trying to understand something, and seeing like a linguist and a mathematician try to figure out aliens is like really cool and fascinating. And seeing that in Arrival, I just think is just astonishingly interesting and fascinating. But seeing that optimism, I think, is something we'll always need in the world and something we always need as humanity. Number 8, if there is any film on this list that you have seen, it's probably number 8. And despite the fact that it might be sort of a lame thing to put a big movie like this on here, rewatching it, I very much cemented to me that it's probably the best of the idea of a cinematic universe, and having that build and eventually become something and build with the audience's recognition of that cinematic universe and actually use it for a storytelling device. And I think number 8 does that better than any film has ever done that thus far, and that would be Captain America: Civil War. You can't really understand this film unless you had seen all the previous movies leading up to it, and if you hadn't, I think you'd no doubt probably be pretty lost, making it the perfect Marvel movie. It's like they kind of keep building on this, and it's quite incredible. It's amazing how personal it can feel. It's almost thrilling as an audience because everyone there understands this experience. I think that's like the fun of Civil War. That's why like these Marvel movies feel special. It's also a lot about ideology. As much as it's about action sequences and cool superhero fights, it's really trying to say something about conflict and different ideologies and getting into the ethics of superheroes and vigilantism, thinking and talking about the ethics and the morals of these characters, not just like how awesome it was that this guy punched that other guy. That's still in there. I mean, this is very like a fun, audience-friendly movie, and if you're looking for an awesome action movie from Marvel, it does that, but also does a lot more while also playing off the preconceived notions that you already have coming in and that you've had throughout all their movies up to this point. Number 7, I think probably it's definitely the film that had me laughing the most, and it's the film I keep referencing, and a film I've probably told more people to see just because it's so enjoyable, and I just frankly love this comedy. It's one of my favorite comedies of the year, and if there's any film I'm going to probably rewatch the most from this year, it most likely will be this one, and that is Popstar: Never Stop, Never Stopping. What's kind of the best thing about Popstar is just how absolutely hilarious it is. There's a part in this which is actually really funny where Connor for real is having an argument with Hunter, who is on his tour, who's helping him sell tickets because he's not selling enough tickets, but they have a confrontation, and Connor for real's documentary is there and Hunter the Hungry's documentary crew as well, and he actually gets confused which camera is his own documentary crew, and they all get tangled up and confused. And it's actually like kind of the way pop stars are now. They have MTV documentary specials, and this film very much reflects that. It takes in a lot of the media that's going on at the time and brilliantly satirizes it, but also realizes you can't really do a movie about a pop star now and do it in this way without acknowledging all those things. It kind of understands the forum and is much a parody of this person as it is a parody of people making documentaries about this person. They just had so many great jokes throughout this film, and it was just so funny, and I just liked laughing throughout it. And I think that's probably the best thing you can say from a comedy. Throughout most of it, I was laughing or smiling. And number 6, The Lobster. is very much about relationships and humanity's fear of being alone, set in a dystopian society where being alone could turn you into an animal or have you killed. And also this film is a deadpan comedy, satirizing how society views people in a couple and how you are viewed because of being in that couple. And bringing that out in kind of this dark comedy makes it seem all that more bizarre and strange. That's kind of an interesting thing to bring up in a movie and also have a love story around it. Shows how great of a director this director is and how smart he is at doing something like that and calling out something in society. It's interesting when someone says something about relationships and how society views them and addresses it so well, but in a surreal, strange way that makes it feel even more absurd than you probably even thought it was. Number 5 is probably one of the best bank robbery movies to really talk about how the bank is robbing us all and how to rob it back, and that would be Hell or High Water. I think a lot of crime dramas talk about the desperation of crime and the desperation of your economic situation. And Hell or High Water captures a kind of criminal desperation and erased American small town, probably more than I've seen any movie do it thus far. It's definitely probably one of the most telling crime drama in a post-economic collapse America, but also can be exciting and thrilling and has an amazing setting in West Texas. It's a beautifully kind of small, modest crime movie that you didn't really think Hollywood would make anymore, and if they did, they wouldn't be this effective. It feels like a B movie that got away with saying a lot because no one was noticing. A crime drama that has something to say is an interesting thing, but it's also plays like a Western, and it has this kind of very 70s way about itself, very kind of defeated, reflects a certain era of America, it reflects a certain small townness, and it uses all that to make a really effective crime drama that says something about our post-economic depression times and how maybe those times aren't as over as we kind of hoped and wished they were and maybe acted like they were, but they're still here, and you probably agree that they should rob the bank and take that money back and hopefully win their land. Number 4 was seeing a filmmaker who I didn't think could make as tremendous of a comeback as he could, and a film I really can't stop thinking about and thinking about the kind of cinematic delight that it really was, and that is The Handmaid. Is a twisting and turning thriller, caper, revenge movie. It's a lot of things, and it's lush and beautiful and male gazy and a lesbian revenge twisting puzzle of a movie that keeps surprising you with revelations as it goes on. But it's a dense movie that keeps revealing itself and peeling back layers, but also as it's peeling back layers, you realize what you were peeling back was a lot bigger than you actually thought it was going to be when you started the process of this whole thing. This has such a well-made, kind of almost classic Hollywood Hitchcockian kind of flow about it, where you're kind of so into the mystery as it goes on. At the beginning, you're in this con and you're with them and you're with how interesting that is, but as it kind of goes on and you go through the puzzle and the maze of this movie, you're kind of more interested in it. And as I went on with this movie, I kind of just got more and more into it. It was like, how many more twists and turns are there going to be? It does have a very gothic sensibility about it, how there's all this hidden perversion, not the lesbian romance, but this hidden perversion of other people that's kind of like the evil of humanity, and how romance has kind of been destroyed by it, but how romance can kind of bloom through it as well. It enthralls you in its mystery. Number 3, Zootopia. One of the things that I really like about animation is that it can sometimes say more than a live action film could and just kind of hide it under the surface. It's kind of like what classic Hollywood films used to do, because people are kind of second guessing it, considering it a kid's film or a lesser medium, so it's able to get away with things that other TV shows or movies wouldn't normally be able to get away with, which makes the medium frankly a lot more exciting and interesting because it can do that. And Zootopia made me think about that a lot, because Zootopia is about a bunny in a society ruled by animals who have become anthropomorphic and live in this city Zootopia, and she's become the first bunny detective and solving a mystery. Certainly it's about that, but it's also about racial relations and how we deal with race in 2016, surprisingly enough. And I think that's kind of what makes it really exciting. It's exciting to see an animated film, and especially a mainstream big budget animated film and have them combined ideas that pretty much a modern audience wouldn't see normally unless it's wrapped up in this package. And Zootopia isn't really a safe movie at all. It's structured like a safe movie. It's structured like a big animation blockbuster, and it has a lot of the tropes of those, so you could just simply watch this as a basic big animated movie, but it then still also has all this stuff about race within it. Certainly things Jenny Hopp says, and her coming from particularly more of a rural background to more of an urban background, and her suddenly using a lot of this terminology is also interesting, and it does bring to mind like In the Heat of the Night and 48 Hours, especially her relationship with the fox Nick Wilde. But that gets into how you view a fox, the cliche of what foxes are supposed to act like. And I think their relationship works exactly how you'd expect something like 48 Hours or In the Heat of the Night to work, because she also has a history, by the way, with foxes. Like, she got beaten up by a fox when she was a kid. A lot of it is about her being more open-minded to predators who she previously wasn't as open-minded to. It's shocking because, like, I've never known Disney to be, like, political, and this one is extremely political in terms of what it's talking about race, and it's much more ambitious than I expected from a Disney film. And number 1 and 2, I had a really hard time picking these, and they flip-flopped several times, and I thought about even tying them because I like them both very much. And if you're gonna take away anything from this year, I really think it should be these two, which I think are just fantastic, amazing films that really both had me kind of taken aback by how good they were. But number 2 probably was that for the longest, more because it was released a lot earlier, but I still think is a fantastic motion picture and one that I will probably be thinking about for a long time. And number 2 is Green Room. It's one of those perfect action genre films that is so precise and so good you kind of can't believe it's real. Green Room really shows that when an action movie's done well, it can really elevate itself to high art. It really was one of the few times I've seen a genre film that just perfectly gets what a great action film can be. There's a geography to it. There's a real tenseness to it. It's real purposefully and precisely directed in a way that you don't see from many action directors. It's as perfectly precisely directed as something like Die Hard or John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. It's a survival movie that keeps surprising you and it keeps hitting you. I really haven't seen somebody understand the building blocks of action and be able to use them as well as Jeremy Saulnier really does. And he does remind me a lot of John Carpenter in Assault on Precinct 13, but instead of cops versus faceless criminals, it's skinheads versus punks, kind of like a protect the fort kind of western where the Indians are going to attack the fort. And I guess, you know, punks and skinheads are the same thing as cowboys and Indians if you think about it, sort of. But if you're really getting down to it and talking about filmmaking, this is the kind of craftsman level genre filmmaking that I wish more directors understood, and very few of them ever will, sadly. And number 1, this is a film that I think if there is any film that comes out of this year, that definitely be a film that we will be talking about in 30 years, and a film that will matter and matter to a lot of people in 20 years, and a film that's very impactful and does a lot of things with character that shows you how someone became who they were and shows you how wonderful movies can be about doing that, but also shows a more complex view of sexuality than I think we've seen, gay or straight, really, and how that sexuality and identity and masculinity and all of that. And I think that's why I almost had to put Moonlight on here. I think it was never a question of it, but I think it is absolutely probably the best movie of 2016. I think it's probably hard to capture someone's entire life in a film. And as much as various biopics and kinds of films try to do that, what Moonlight does is it takes moments and shows you how this person, Chiron, became who he was or who he is, and how that has morphed and evolved over time, and how that tragedy and misunderstanding and foolishness and sexuality and love and hate all made him who he was. It felt so relatable and predictable in a way. It feels like a film that is predictable in the way that life is predictable, that we are able to second guess people in our own lives, that everyone kind of has a shared experience of growing up, whether they realize it or not. With Moonlight and what they do with the character of Chiron is really incredibly interesting and probably one of the most empathetic versions of a biography I've ever seen. The fragileness of masculinity and how much masculinity is important, particularly in children and teens, and what that represents. But I think masculinity is a lot more fragile than people are willing to admit. It's why masculinity and the idea of struggling with your sexuality, I think, is something most people at least question it and question their own sexuality to a regard. I think it's probably unhealthy not to. And the way this film tackles that with masculinity, I think is very interesting, because I don't think I've seen a biopic both talk about sexuality and identity and masculinity all wrapped up into one. I think Barry Jenkins, and what he does in this film is he makes like a really artfully done, amazing character piece that's really about how this character became who he was, but it also feels like flow-wise something different, something that's going too fast, something unexpected, but also feeling expected the way life is. Moonlight has such power in it. It has such passion about it. It feels like you're seeing things you shouldn't be seeing. It feels like you're seeing intimate moments, but that almost makes it so much more relatable and real. So that was the top 10 of 2016. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the reviews I made in 2016. I think 2017 will be a better year. I think it'll definitely be a better year for me personally, for obvious reasons. But I think 2016 was probably the best year for this channel ever. And I thank all of you for being here. You guys really made this probably one of the best years I've ever had on YouTube. So thank you all very much. But I think it's been a great year making videos. I'm really proud of the kind of videos I've been able to make, from Deep Focus starting this year to all the reviews to the new show Movie Crap, which I guess is technically 2017, but I'll mention it anyway, to personal stuff, to all that stuff. And you guys have been with me the entire time, and it's been awesome just covering this year, whether I liked it or not. I had a good time making the videos, maybe more than watching the movies to make the videos up. Although the classic movies I quite enjoyed. So in terms of older movies, that was great, but you get to pick those. So I hope if you haven't seen any of these 10 films, you go out and seek them. I think they're all worthy. Elle might be a little difficult for some people, and they might not like that one, but the other ones I think are enjoyable. Overall, I think 2016 did a lot of things that most years couldn't do, and maybe in terms of the best movies, it was a lot better year than maybe the general sense that this year reflects. And if you just watch these movies, it was a much better year than the year actually was. But really, when we're looking back on things, that's usually how we do it anyway, and that's still a really marvelous thing that all these films really did. So if you want to comment below in the comments and leave me what you thought were your personal favorite movies of the year, or what your top 10 list, feel free to do that in the comments below. Or if you'd like to comment on the movies that are in this list, or what order you think they should be in, or whatever, that's cool. Thank you all very much for watching. Thank you for giving me probably one of the best years I've ever had on YouTube, and subscribe if you would like to, and have an awesome 2017.